Good afternoon. My name is Kathleen Dudley, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Jeanice Barcelo. And thank you and very welcome, Jeanice, for
Thanks,
coming.
Kathleen. So good to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I am a holistic reflexologist, and I have been writing a book called Women's Worth, Man's Worth: The Overfed Body, the Underfed Soul. And in the exploration of that since 2013, I've been looking at what has happened to our men, and I've been observing that. And for the longest time, I was looking at it more from an environmental perspective and the food and the herbicides, the pesticides. But I have come to understand, and in particular, since my introduction into understanding the work of Jeanice's, that this goes well beyond that. And that historically, it has a very long root. And so today I want to welcome Jeanice, and we're going to talk about the insidiousness, the root of pornography and how that has and is harming our men, our warriors, and from the perspective of the strength of our humanity, the strength of our families, and what that is doing to undermine the very people, the human beings that we look to protect us and to keep us strong, the women, the children. So thank you, Jeanice, and please.
It's my great pleasure to be here, and I will and to talk about this topic, which I think is a critically important topic to understand the demoralization of men in our society, and the inability, it seems, of the male energy at this point to step up to protect the very essentials of our world. And so evil is definitely appearing to get the upper hand at this point. And I don't think this would have occurred even 150 or 200 years ago in the United States. I think people would have been hanging from lampposts, but something has happened to the men. And it's a multifaceted agenda or attack against the male energy, of which pornography is a big piece. I will say that another piece of this is circumcision, the genital torture and mutilation of infants that imprints into the psyche a sense of helplessness and a memory of just the incredible cruelty and evil that these creatures are capable of. And I call the beings responsible for this creatures because I do not think that they are fully human. I think that we are dealing with an Anunnaki bloodline, many of whom are Anunnaki human hybrids. And Anunnaki beings are not capable of love. They're not capable even of most emotions. They're very analytical, technological race of beings that can carry out plans over many centuries with little departure from set goals. And so when they torture infants, they don't have any emotions around that whatsoever. Although I do think it feeds them energetically at some level. We put off radiation and other energies that they seem to take in.
Jeanice, that was something, that was something that we talked about a little bit prior to the interview. And that is that there's an energy that comes through these very deviant, satanic practices that that everyone is exposed to, whether you're even the creatures perpetrating them. And so that to me is one of the most devious parts of all of this, even just as someone who wants to become aware of the creature's perspectives and actions And so we lose a little bit of our, we have to grow up and face what is truly happening. And it doesn't come easily. As I indicated to you, I'm going to lose some of my own innocence in this interview.
Yeah.
So folks, hang on. So can
Yes.
you give us an historical setting for the creatures and how pornography came about as a part of the destabilizing of our cultures, of our men, of
Yeah.
our, you
I
know.
mean, I can tell you how I think the creatures themselves have come about, but when we get right to the pornography piece, how they introduced this Luciferian force into our civilization was actually through the Kinsey, the Kinsey, Alfred Kinsey research.
Oh, no
Okay?
way.
Alfred Kinsey was a pedophile and a sadomasochist. He was somebody that circumcised himself with a pocket knife. He literally stood on a chair in his basement, tied a rope around his scrotum, threw it over a pipe, right? Grabbed the other end, and then knocked the chair out from under him and hung himself by his balls. And he filmed it for his pornography collection.
Oh,
So this man was insane. He was obviously a victim of satanic ritual abuse and clearly part of their cult. But he was promoted to godhood in our culture through what they call the Kinsey studies, the Kinsey research. Now, Kinsey research was fundamentally based on hiring pedophiles to masturbate children 24/7 around the clock. We know this because we have charts from the Kinsey books of his research indicating this 7-month-old was in a 24-hour period had this many so-called orgasms. Okay, 7-month-old or 11-month-old or 3 years old, or on and on it went. So we know that pedophiles were hired. We know that some of his so-called research findings involved studying prisoners, prostitutes, studying their behavior, their sexual behavior, and then putting that forth as if this was typical sexual behavior of the human male, okay, and the human female. So that research, in fact, his book on the sexual behavior of the human female was released, was it 54? I have to go back and check. The very same year that Hugh Hefner released the first issue of Playboy magazine.
1953.
3, okay. So we have these energies moving out into American society at the same time. This is a very well coordinated effort to move pornography out at the same time our people are being told that this is how women behave. In other words, that women behave like prostitutes
Wow.
and men behave like rapists, okay, the rapists that they're interviewing in prisons. And this was put forth as traditional sexual behavior. So unfortunately, you know, this is a Jewish thing. 100%. Hugh Hefner is a Jew. Pornography is controlled by Jews. The entire Kinsey research was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. And the Rockefellers, we know, are German Jews. They were originally Rockefelders. So we know there's something going on in the Jewish bloodlines that which I believe is Anunnaki genetics, that enables them to bring forth these very hideous plans of how they're going to go about taking over the earth. And of course, one of the main ways to do that is to neutralize the men in the myriad ways that they have gone about doing that. But in the 1950s, pornography and the sexual revolution were coming very, very quickly. And that led to what's called the sexual revolution, the Kinsey studies, the Kinsey research. And we learned very quickly that boys who watched pornography started to engage in sexually violent behavior. Like, it went up so fast. I could pull up a statistic for you. Let me see. Okay, between 1960 and 1999, there was a 418% increase in forcible rape
Wow.
that was reported.
Is that
So
taking into account what's going on in Sweden?
I'm not sure what you mean. What's going on in Sweden?
Well, actually, that wouldn't be, because that is a more current, that's in the 2000s. Well, because of the United Nations work to with the Kalergi plan to destabilize countries where they're bringing immigrants in. Stockholm is now the rape capital of the world, but that's been happening since, I think, about 2013 or 14. So this year stats are before then.
Yeah, they're well before then. And to say what's going on in Sweden, in the UK, in Germany, and now in the United States, in Canada, Australia, primarily white Christian civilizations are under attack. The Jews have an. If we really go back to the beginning and we see, my perspective on this is that
we broke up right then. You said the white Christian civilization is under attack, and then we broke up.
And we have to understand that there is a Jewish agenda to destroy the white race. There is a genocidal agenda that's been going on for centuries. And just in this century alone, we know that the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia was led by Jews and was responsible for the slaughter of 66 million white Russian Christians, primarily white Russian Christians. We know that World War II was instigated and completely controlled by the Jews, and Jews declared war against Germany. And we have 16 million white Christian Germans slaughtered during and immediately after World War II, although they harp on this lie about 6 million Jews just being killed, which never happened. Total reversal of reality, which they're experts at. But I want people to understand that these creatures, as I mentioned, are hybrids. So they are an interspecies race, okay? And they want to pollute the pristine genetics on this planet of the pristine races who are not infected with Anunnaki genetics.
Jeanice, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. You know, when I hear that, I mean, everything that you have said so far, I'm aware of. And it's still as shocking every time I hear it spoken, because it's spoken so little. So your clarity on it is, I'm very grateful. But what is behind this heinous need to destroy?
Okay, so here's my perspective.
Please.
And I don't have scientific evidence.
I don't care.
Back up what I'm about to say, all right? If we go back to the story of Lucifer, once upon a time, there was a being named Lucifer who was one of God's favorite angels, very beautiful being, but he got a little uppity and decided he didn't want to be an underling to God, that he himself was a God and that he should be worshiped as God. And he got into a battle with the Creator. Okay. And apparently there were a number of angels that followed Lucifer against God. Now, that creature that I call Lucifer, there are many names for him, he created a race of beings called the Anunnaki. Okay? With the express purpose that these beings would have the task of destroying God's creations.
Mm.
Okay, and everything that God brought forth, especially humans. For whatever reason, he hates humanity because I think humanity in its pristine form was actually the pinnacle of the Creator's creations. You know, when you read the true history of our civilization through the Ringing Cedars books, for example, you can understand this extreme rage that they have toward us because they are not that. They are not beautiful. They're tasked with the job of evil from their inception. That's why they're created, the Anunnaki. And they've come to the earth multiple times, and they're definitely here right now. I think Eve's little indiscretion at the beginning of the Bible, when she was beguiled by the serpent, I do believe she ended up having sex with an Anunnaki and producing Cain. And I've heard rabbis talk, one rabbi talk about how Cain was deformed because he was part of the serpent's seed. He was not of the same bloodline that his brother was part of. So Cain was an interspecies mutant. And we're dealing with this bloodline. And that's, interestingly enough, when Eve did that, that's when the Jewish people begin their story. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So we have a race that's part human, part Anunnaki. They're kind of like them and kind of like us. And I'm sure there's a war going on inside many Jewish people with these two energies because the Anunnaki genetics are tasked with the destruction of the pristine earthling bloodlines, the races. So I hope that explains it in a nutshell. That's the best explanation I could come up with about what's actually going on here.
It does. Thank you. And I don't want to get too far off of this, but
Yeah.
Off of your focus. But as far as this whole world that I've been raised in, to say anything against the Jews was tantamount to killing one's own self. And so here we are speaking words that we have been taught, that everyone's been taught, are not to be spoken.
Good for us.
Yes.
Overcoming that mind control.
Yes.
And breaking out of that hypnotic spell. And
Yes.
saying, damn right, I'm going to talk about this because people need to understand what's going on here. We have to know this.
Yes, we do.
We have got to lift our people to the best of our ability out of the mind control. And so being very honest, this is not a racist commentary that I'm giving. It's an explanation for what's going on. And it would be, you know, I can say it in such a way that there are Jewish people who won't get offended because they'll begin to understand what's actually going on and what's causing this dilemma. Most Jewish people have no idea about what I'm saying, what I'm talking about, but there are those that instinctively this makes sense. It explains why the Jews have been kicked out of so many countries. It explains why they've been involved in human sacrifice for centuries, why they've been torturing infants, why they've been drinking blood, torturing animals on the streets of New York City in 2016 or 17, swinging chickens over their heads and slaughtering the chickens, putting all their evil deeds into the chickens so that the streets of Brooklyn are running red with blood. Seriously, what is going on with these people? There's something not right with this cult. This is a Luciferian cult and a Luciferian bloodline. And the Jewish people, if they understood this, would have an opportunity to make a choice. Do I want to purge and purify all the Anunnaki genetics out of my system and align with the human race? or do I want to go with the
So
Anunnaki?
Janice, is this not very similar to everything that all of us are dealing with then? We all must awaken to the lies, no matter what our country, what our race, what our religion. I mean, if we look at, is it the Morgenthau plan for the denazification of the Germans? So many of the Germans don't even know that they're not guilty for all the crimes that they've been taught they're guilty about. And so it's no different than people who are Jewish, people who are German, people who live in Germany, people who are not aware of the fact that there is no virus, that it's actually a lie, that there is no pandemic, that in fact this is about communitarianism and Bolshevik communism, and that this is about AI and transhumanism and the move to take us all into an enslaved place. So aren't we all having to wake up? Is this not just the Jews, the Germans, the white Christians? This is everybody's call to awaken today.
Yes, to awaken that we are under planetary attack by an alien race that has no business being here. And the problem too is we've been worshiping them as gods. I'm convinced that Yahweh is actually Enki, right? One of the head Anunnaki people. And when you look at the Bible realistically, you know that Lord was walking around the earth. He was walking around the earth in the garden. He was walking around the earth when they came to Lot's house with two of his Anunnaki buddies. That's not the creator. This is an entity that people have been worshiping for centuries as if he were God. And this is a huge thing to come out of. This is heavy duty mind control, of which I've had to come out. And really, I grew up on Long Island. Many of my friends were Jewish. My stepfather's Jewish. I mean, I had Jewish people all around me. When I started waking up to the reality of what was happening and began speaking about it because of my concern about circumcision, because of my concern about the torture of infants, because of my concern about the takeover of the medical establishment by this satanic Luciferian cult and the evil that was being perpetrated, all my Jewish friends disappear, disown me, you know? But now is different. Now you gotta understand. We've all got to understand. All of us to some degree have Anunnaki genetics floating around in our bodies because we've been injected with their genetics through their vaccines. We've been given GMO foods and a variety of things to try to break down the pristine genetics, not to mention the pollution of the genetics through intercourse. And back to the pornography industry, encouraging everybody, have sex, have sex, have sex, seek the orgasm, right? Forget about enduring human love and healthy, happy families. Just have sex and get off as much as you can, because that, we are told, is what's going to lead us to happiness, right? On the contrary, what's happening is we're moving further and further away from the possibility of achieving an enduring union based in love. And that's actually based on somebody who is our real match. Yeah, we end up partnering with.
And when you're saying this, I can't help but think of the work of Not in His Image by John Lamb Lash, and he talks about the Gnostikoi and the connection to Sophia, to earth, to nature, and how could anyone destroy an entire culture of people, the pagans, who were honoring one another and honoring nature, and destroy them, tearing them apart, and then going to the indigenous peoples all over the world and destroying them. What kind of religion is that is so full of hatred and annihilation, and that those religions of Christianity and Judaism and Islam created by this demented deity that
Yeah.
I think are very much what you're also referring to as the Anunnaki.
Yeah. Well, we got to be very careful today and very discerning. John Lash himself is a Luciferian. In his mind, Sophia is Lucifer. And when he talks about Sophia, and I can give you references for this, when he talks about Sophia, being the earth, he's actually talking about the Luciferian um, conquer of the earth. So you got to be careful who we follow, because he's telling some truth about the dark side of Yahweh that that people can actually really connect with and say, yeah, that's absolutely right. This deity is deranged. But he himself is a Luciferian, and he promotes Lucifer on a regular basis. So beware of John Lash and his work. That's all I'll say about him. We trying to sort through all who these entities are and what they are is a little bit complicated. Um, when we pay attention to people like John Lash pontificating for hours at a time without really saying a whole lot that people can grasp onto, except the part about Yahweh, right? Um, we just need to be careful, be very, very discerning, because he will trick people. With respect to the Bible, we have to understand that all the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Islam and Christianity are offshoots of Judaism. Judaism is the foundational satanic cult, of which these other satanic branches have emerged. Now, let me be clear, Christianity has a completely different morality than either Islam or Judaism. Christianity frowns upon pedophilia. Christianity frowns upon abortion. Christianity frowns upon pornography. Okay. Judaism is promoting and trying to normalize. They've worked overtime to normalize all of these things, right down to transgenderism and the rape of children. This is in their Talmud, that you can have sex with a 3-year-old. A 3-year-old girl, it's okay to sodomize a boy between 3 and 9. This is all in their quote unquote holy book.
Wow.
Okay. So this is the reality of what we're dealing with. And it is from that root that Christianity and Islam emerge. And if we look at Christianity closely, it is, in a nutshell, the worship of of human sacrifice.
Yes.
So we've got a guy hanging dead on a cross, tortured for days, bleeding, right? They love to catch the blood. And in the Catholic tradition, we have people symbolically drinking and eating the body parts of the sacrificed man. This is 100% satanic ritual.
Yeah.
So it's again coming out of the mind control and looking at this, really looking at it for the first time, as if for the first time, and seeing what all of this actually is. If you can step out of the box of religion just for a short time and look at this, you will see what I see. And maybe me just talking about this and saying these things will help people see. So that's why I do it, because I want to help people see. The more of us that see, the less power they have to control us, because we can see what they do, how they do it. All we can see as soon as they put forth a pandemic that it's nonsense. It's utter total bullshit. We can see that these masks are preposterous. And anybody that's wearing a mask is committing suicide and killing their children. So
Even
that's why
the Michigan governor has just now pontificated that 2-year-olds must wear masks. I write letters of exemption for people to not wear masks. And so I've had desperate parents now contacting me about their 2-year-olds, which is as criminal as it gets, you know, a psychological scarring for any child, but for a 2-year-old. And to look at the governor's face and the smile, or you can't see the smile because she's masked in her satanic ritualistic garb. But
And
yes,
she's a he. She's a he to boot.
oh, she is.
She's
Oh,
a tranny. It's a tranny.
wow.
Okay.
Well, you know, I met a woman when I moved to New Mexico 23 years ago, and she looked at me and she said, "Everything you've been told is a lie." And I looked back at her and I said, "Really?" But you know, for all these years, I have proven to myself through my educational efforts and curiosity that she's correct.
Yeah.
Much to my chagrin.
Anything that we're told basically by the media, which is controlled by the Jews, or the medical establishment that is controlled by the Jews, or the government that is controlled by the Jews, or the educational institution that is controlled by the Jews, these are lies.
Yes.
Yes.
Now,
And
now, one thing that I was told very recently by a dear person in my life who will be viewing this, that the book burning in Germany was not what we were led to think it was.
Right.
But it was actually Marxist books and pornography, the
Exactly.
pornography that was brought in by the Jews into
100%.
Germany to destabilize it, along with all the drugs, because Germany was such a capable country of people who had a work ethic and a moral conviction and ethics, and they were unstoppable. Plus,
Yeah.
they did not want to be a part of the central banking system, and therefore they were deemed to be destroyed.
Totally. I mean, yeah, Hitler created his own currency. He actually imprisoned a Rothschild. I think he was the first leader to ever do that. Um,
Wow.
and it's what they do everywhere they go. So they infiltrate various countries and they act normal for a while, and they're sort of like chameleons. They fit in and pretend that they're the same until they get the download that it's time to act. And then they start with the banking, right? With the Federal Reserve in the United States. And they start with the pornography, which they did similar in Germany to Weimar Germany, for example. It was totally sexually polluted filth, right? They turned this magnificent culture into this disgusting filth, which they've done here in the United States. These people are disgusting in their sexual behavior and in their beliefs around this, that it's okay to pretend that you're a man when you're a woman, or to pretend that you're a woman when a man, and it's okay for the medical establishment to cut up your breasts when you're 10 or 13 years old, or cut up your penis because you decided that you're in the wrong body. And this is what liberals actually think this is okay. This is completely fine, right? This is insanity, but this is what the Jews do everywhere they go. They pollute sexuality, right? They turn it into Luciferian filth. They bring pornography, they bring strip shows, prostitution, all of this stuff, right? They rape children, they sacrifice children. Incest is phenomenally large in the Jewish communities. And of course, they do usury. They steal all the wealth of the nations that they enter into. And then they steal people's minds through their mind control techniques. This is the MO. This is their AI programming. This is what they have been conditioned to know will work for their attempted takeover of civilizations. All right. And if you look in the Bible, All you got to do is look at your so-called holy book, and everywhere these people go, entire civilizations are brought to the ground. Everywhere they go. So pay attention to what's been right in front of you for centuries. It's been right there. That's the history of the Jewish people. Let's pay attention. And the Jews need to pay attention. Like, wow, am I really part of this bloodline? And how do I clear it? Because I know that the pristine human genetics are more powerful. And I know that the pristine human capacities can override those genetics simply through intention and will.
Right.
So I would recommend to the Jewish people, you get on it and make a decision that you're going to override those genetics. You want no part of them. You want them erased and squashed, instead of supporting this wicked bloodline that keeps telling you, you got to marry into the Jewish tradition. You know, you got to keep this bloodline glowing. You can't undermine this bloodline. You can't bring any of the bloodlines around you or into so-called the sacred land of Israel. Or it's very strong that they're taught to maintain their genetics.
Mhm. Mhm.
On the other end of it, they're also taught to pollute the genetics of every other race.
You know, I have a young friend who is in his late 20s, and he told me, we were talking about these issues of our men and how men have been taken down, they've been attacked, under attacked, and there's a crisis among our men.
Yes.
And he said that he had been over 50 pounds heavier than he was the day we talked. He had man breasts from all the synthetic estrogen in the foods and the environmental exposures, and of course that's from smoking pot, and it increases the breast tissue and develops breasts in men. And curiously, an aside, how isn't it interesting that Justin Trudeau has just legalized pot smoking all across Canada, and we have it in Washington and Oregon and Colorado, and people do not know that fact. But he said that his whole generation has been become addicted to pornography, and he said he has broken his pornographic addiction. He said he has changed his diet. He's from an Hispanic culture. He's used his own traditional herbs, and he has regained his masculinity. His voice has dropped an entire tenor. He no longer has male breasts, and he's changed. But it was from his education and his own curiosity and his knowledge of what has happened. He's aware of what we're talking about today, and he refuses to be enslaved and dismantled, because basically his own genetics, his own birthright as a man is being systematically dismantled.
Yes.
And when I talk with him, I feel like I'm in the midst of the energy of a very empowered man, one of our warriors. And that's who we need to bring back and educate, because this is happening.
Oh, it's touching my heart, because it's so, you said it so well, and it's so beautiful how badly this is needed. And this is a man I'd like to meet too. How wonderful to hear of a man that's so understanding of how this has happened and has been able to come out of it and grown to the other side to reclaim his essence. So yeah, I mean, with the pornography, you know, we have to understand that the cell phones are a fundamental weapon right now, okay? And they're being handed to very young children, 5 years old. And there's pornography all over these phones, available to children. When I did my talk in 2016 at Free Your Mind, the average age for children to tune into pornography was 11. Now I'm
Oh,
sure it's much earlier,
oh,
right? So these young boys are being taught to masturbate to an image on a screen. And they do this over and over and over again, which creates neurological wiring, literally, because the more you do it, the more, they have a saying that says neurons that fire together wire together. So we're creating this neurological highway that is programming this very young boy to only get off, number one, through dissociative sex, meaning his soul cannot stay in the body for this, because this is contradictory to the soul's energy. The soul's energy is about love, and this is a demonic force. In fact, they gather on the sets of pornographic films before they start filming to call in demons onto the set, and, and so that these demons will be in the films and unleashed into people's lives who watch the films.
wow.
All right. So these boys are having what I call dissociative sex. The spirit leaves the body. Okay. The body's on automatic pilot now, being programmed neurologically. And there's no human love, there's no human connection, and there's no soul connection. This is a complete dissociative act, and it's repeated over and over and over again, causing programming, literally neurological programming, so that when this child is 16, 17, meets a young woman that he might feel attracted to, or maybe even develop a loving relationship with, there's no way. He cannot even get an erection with a human female.
Wow. Wow.
He's having what's called impotence at the age of 17
Wow.
from
Wow.
all the masturbation to pornography.
Wow.
And these children, here's a very deeper part of this, okay? These children are conceived by people, most of whom have no interest to create life. They're simply having intercourse to get off. And the children are created as a side effect of fleshy gratification. Okay. So, and many of these children are not wanted. Many of these children are aborted. Many of these children are in wombs where they're not wanted at all. The mother's going, should I kill my baby? Some of them actually do kill their babies. So their imprinting is not for love. Their imprinting is for a carnal based life because of what their parents did. And many of these parents have had pornographic influence and may have been thinking pornographic thoughts at the time of conception. So we do not know how many entities were actually in that space where the conception took place, or how seriously these demonic entities may influence the outcome of this child's development.
Wow.
So this goes very deep, and this is part of the Kinsey program, okay, was to, in the 1930s or 40s in the United States, at least, it would have been a real issue if women had sex before marriage. It was really, really frowned upon. Even when I was conceived in 1958, by the way, in the back seat of a car at a drive-in movie theater by two teenagers who had used pornography, okay? Even in 1958, my mother was shamed for doing what she did and forced to marry my father. You know, my grandmother was really upset with what she did. But look at it now. Look at what's happened in less than 100 years, what they've been able to accomplish, where we have parents with teenagers allowing their son or daughter to have lovers in their house, having sex years before marriage, right? And living together. And this is okay. We've been taught that this is perfectly moral and fine. And we've been taught that God gave us physical pleasure because God wants us to have physical pleasure. The truth is, every orgasm in the way that we're doing it is so fleeting and incomplete, and it cannot compare with even the smallest part of what our Creator has designed for us to experience when we make the choice to, to bring our bodies together for the purpose of creating life in the image of God instead of in the image of God's adversary.
You know, I wanted to add a little bit to my story about my young friend who has so wisely reversed all of this horror in which he's been distilled, and found his way back to his manhood, his warrior posture, his power, his strength, through good diet, through exercise, through breaking his addiction to pornography. But one thing he said is the women of his generation don't want men like him. They don't want them. And so while we're talking about men, we should maybe just take a side step to look at what is happening to our women. You know, women are becoming staunchly aggressive and not understanding their own femininity, their capacity to receive, to even recognize the differences between being a woman and a man, and the beauty of those differences between the two genders. And so, you know, women too, you know, masturbation for women, I would assume then will have the same, based on what you're saying, will have the same effect upon a woman as a man.
You know, I want to stress that what I say is not to try to be judgmental against people, because I too bought into this mind control programming. And for many, many years, I did present myself as a sexual object, believing that somehow if I could entice a man with the charms of my body, that somehow that would lead me to love. Right. So women are taught that if we present ourselves as sexual objects, that'll lead us to happiness somehow. And we make that mistake. And I was a sexual priestess. You know, when I lived on Maui for 3 years, I decided that I was going to participate in sexual healing work. And that involved erotic body work, right, with a happy ending. Um, I bought into this hook, line, and sinker, thinking that somehow if I could sexually pleasure a man, that would somehow lead me to love, which it did not, obviously, just the opposite, because those who wanted to have sexual pleasure with me were not those who were a match for me, okay, on a spiritual level. Let me just put it that way. And some of the best sex I had was with the most abusive men I'd ever met. And so you can have an orgasm followed by weeks and months of emotional pain. And you know something wrong has happened. Something very wrong has happened. You can have multiple partners and vaginosis and yeast infections, and your physical body is going, something is disgustingly wrong here. You need to stop doing what you're doing. Okay. So there's that programming for women. On top of, we are living in a society lacking male power. So women are then feeling forced to take on the male role. And in many ways, I see myself doing this right now. I'm in a situation where there's a smart meter on this property. I want that thing off this property. It's not my property. And the man of this property is not willing to stand up against this. So where does that leave us? Is that we have to pick up the slack to try to protect ourselves, to protect our children, our pets, our plants, our insects, everything around us, if the men are not doing it.
Well, I would also say that as women, with feminine capacities, we can be the warrioress without compromising ourselves. So I understand what you're saying, but the fewer men there are who stand in their power because of the degradation of their own capacities through all these external manipulations and evil intentions, it does put us more at risk of having to stand in that posture longer than is probably good for us, because our own wiring is changed as well.
Yeah.
If our neurological wiring is wiring that is always in that posture of external protection,
defense. Yes.
then that alters us. Yes.
Yeah. And unfortunately for us, because of that change in our feminine energy, it's going to be harder and harder to find a match, right? Because we have to find I have to find a very powerful man if this guy's going to be a match for me, because of what I've had to develop in myself for lack of male protection and for lack of male guidance and support throughout my life.
Very good point.
So this is damaging the entire civilization, what's going on. And again, I do think circumcision is a fundamental piece of this, because that imprinting of helplessness and that memory of the cruelty that these creatures can inflict, I think it causes something in the men to not act like, I can't understand it otherwise. We have a population that's armed to the teeth in the United States, and nobody's taken out a gun.
Well, I know a lot of men. I mean, if you just think about which religious groups are circumcised and those that aren't. So there are a lot of men who are circumcised, who are very much in the warrior posture. And yes, so I think it's so many more facets involved, and that you can't necessarily build an army if you don't have the forces to draw from. And maybe that's more what you're referring to, that if you look to the past of, for example, the Highlanders, and to their armies of men, of all those warriors, they had a lot to draw from. Today, maybe we have fewer men to draw from to build that army to go up against the creatures. But you also have to know who the enemy is in order to fight a war. And so many people, that's part of what is so insidious about this war against humanity today, is that it's not exactly an army standing in front of us that you can say, oh, it's that, and that. It's an invisible war. Mind control is invisible. Pornographic impact is invisible. The takedown of men's testosterone through the increase of estrogen, synthetic estrogen, is invisible. The addictions to alcohol and drugs and all of these things that further deplete the body, these are all invisible. So it's not the same kind of warfare. So to say, here, man, come out here, take a gun, and you fight our fight for us, it's a totally different strategy. Today, it's about becoming educated about who the enemy is, who those creatures are, so that we can actually go, oh, this is an internal thing. I'm going to change my diet. I'm going to change my behavior. I'm going to change all of these elements in my life and become strong and empowered. And I think that's the spiritual battle that we're aware of. This is a war against our spirituality.
It's a war against our spiritual power for sure. And the other thing that was occurring in my mind as you're talking about pornography piece is the programming that's going on to make men homosexual and to make men even attracted to men that are dressed as women, okay, pretending to be women, or to make men attracted to children, right? All of this programming to make men attracted to sexually violent behavior. I mean, women are also affected by pornography. So it's not just the men that are being laid to waste, basically. But when I see homosexual men, you know, I immediately think, what a waste of masculine potential, you know, what a shame.
Yes.
And that's another piece that we should talk about, is the sodomy piece, because they have used pornography to normalize sodomy. Now, I want people to think about this because, again, we have to remember this is a spiritual battle. And in the creator's domain, a penis is supposed to be attached to a man that's in love with a woman with a vagina. And these two parts, these two bodies and their parts, are supposed to come together to bring love into eternity, basically through the creation of life, right? That's the ideal scenario. Now, when you take your penis and you put it in an orifice where excrement comes out, that is the biggest insult to the creator that I could imagine. And in fact, that is why they do it. They call sodomy the key to the Luciferian order. Okay, I'm not kidding. Let me see if I can bring up the exact language of this. What they say is, it's called the key of David.
Oh, wow.
Okay, and it is a foundation of the satanic order. They call it Satan's sex. And the initiation into the Luciferian order is achieved by the sodomizing of a 3-year-old child. This is the beginning requirement of that child rising up into the ranks of the Illuminati. What they call the Illuminati. Okay. The other thing about sodomy is that, according to a survivor, sodomy attacks the nerves at the base of the spine, and it causes something neurological to happen in the brain so that it changes the way the mind works, and it affects the person's mind in a way that nothing else can. And so this enables the development of alter personalities, personalities that will be in service to the Luciferian cult. And in fact, that's what transgenderism is. These are alter personalities that have been created either through systematic sexual abuse or very strong levels of mind control, right? Through the educational system, through the movie industry, through the music industry, all controlled by the Jews. So sodomy is a fundamental piece of their game. And according to Marion Knox, who was a survivor, he said, sodomy has a spiritual component in it that is far more sinister than anybody recognizes. It is the most underrated evil to the general public, but to people in the know. This is the ultimate rebellion against God himself. This is what they hope to use to gain the whole human race for their side, to defeat God. That's what's going on here, folks. In a nutshell, is a battle for God's domain and over God's creations, including us. That's what Luciferians do and are putting forth. So understand, because I made the mistake, when I was married to my first husband in my early 20s, we did watch pornography at that time. And I believed sodomy was normal. And I let that happen to my body and between us. What disgusting filth to have feces on my husband's penis. Like, how is this even remotely connected to love? The anus is a one-way orifice. It's designed to be an exit-only orifice, and the skin in the anus is very, very sensitive and vulnerable and can get ripped and tears. And then you're dealing with feces that can get in and cause disease like AIDS, which they blame on a virus, which is not because of a virus. It's because of this filth that's getting into the system called excrement. Because of a homosexual way of life involves multiple partners. It involves multiple acts of sodomy. This is extremely dangerous and unhealthy. And this is not to judge people who have obviously been abused at some point in their life to make them even remotely interested in such behavior. This is not part of God's plan, and people are not born this way. They are violated very early in life, and you can be violated in infancy. I've heard stories where a father sees his infant daughter being born, and the OB sticks his finger in the baby's vagina, tells the father, I have to make sure everything's okay in there. Are you kidding me?
Wow.
This is happening.
Wow.
So the sexual violence occurs in the earliest stages of infancy through the medical establishment. And of course, circumcision being a fundamental part of that.
Well, as I said when before we started, I knew that I was going to be changed by this interview, and I am, and I thank you for the education. I thank you for the history, because without understanding what every single act against a person does and what it means, we cannot be sovereign people. We can't move forward in our empowerment. And so when we normalize, as you were saying, when we normalize torture, we normalize sadistic behavior, because that's what we've been taught. The whole MK Ultra program, the CIA driven, the Tavistock Institute, which brought us sex, drugs, and rock and roll in the 60s. Both of those mind control institutions were there to totally dismantle us. So until we actually become educated and hear the hard stuff and think about it and become curious enough about it to want to look further at this, then we cannot stand up and claim our sovereignty. And to me, that's what this is all about. So Jeanice, I thank you for this very complicated and difficult subject, and thank you for your courage and for bringing this to us.
It's my pleasure. And I just want to add one more thing, that
Please do.
we have to understand what these behaviors, that these behaviors are also an act against God himself and against creation. And the more we see the spiritual dynamic of what's being promoted as normal, the more likely we will be to be able to free ourselves from this kind of mind control. And let's make that a priority. Number one, that we connect with the Creator, that we connect with the source of love, that is our true God, and that we be able to break the mind control and see what's going on in order to save ourselves and our people and our bloodlines. Those are good aspirations. And please check out my website at birthofanewearth.com. And thank you, Kathleen, for being willing to discuss this most difficult topic.
You're very welcome, and thank you, Jeanice.
Yeah.